Welcome back, geographers. How did Europeans colonize the tropical north? Early history and colonization. Indigenous peoples have lived in this region for thousands of years. Along the Caribbean and Atlantic coasts were Carib, Arawak, and other hunter-gatherer peoples. The Kara and other peoples built fishing villages along the Pacific coast. Groups like the Chibcha and Quitu settled in mountain valleys in the Andes. They farmed, made cotton cloth and gold ornaments, and traded with the Inca. In the late 1400s, some of these groups were conquered and became part of the Inca Empire. Spanish adventurers landed on the Caribbean and Atlantic coasts in the early 1500s. When they found no gold there, they lost interest. Spain first settled in Venezuela in 1523 and Colombia in 1525. They invaded Ecuador in 1534, after conquering the Inca. By the mid-1500s, Spain controlled all of what is now Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. They did not colonize east of Venezuela. The Spanish set up governments in their new colonies. Their capitals were located where there were already Native American settlements. Most were inland, at higher elevations. Climates were milder than on the tropical coasts. In the 1700s, the Spanish placed Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia under a single government. Native Americans suffered greatly under Spanish rule. Thousands died of European diseases. They had no natural immunity or protection against these illnesses. Other Native Americans were forced to work for Spanish colonists under a system called the encomienda. They often worked in mines and for large estates called haciendas. Most haciendas grew coffee, tobacco, sugarcane, or other cash crops. Some were cattle ranches. The British, Dutch, and French fought over and colonized Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. The British and Dutch started sugar plantations. They also brought the first enslaved Africans to the area. Control of these colonies changed hands and names several times in the 1600s and 1700s. Independence. By the late 1700s, many Spanish colonists wanted independence. They got their chance when the French conquered Spain in 1808. Ecuadorians rose up in 1809. Colombians and Venezuelans soon followed. At first, the war was between groups that wanted to be independent and groups that stayed loyal to Spain. Spain expelled the French in 1814. It then tried to restore order in South America. The colonies resisted Spain's efforts to re-establish control. Venezuelan Simon Bolívar led the revolt in the north. In 1819, Bolívar united Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. He became the first president of the new Republic of Gran Colombia. After Bolívar's death in 1830, Ecuador and Venezuela became independent countries. In the early 1900s, Panama became independent from Colombia. Independence did not bring democracy and peace. Wealthy landholders and wealthy city business people competed for control of the government. Conflict over the role of the Catholic Church in society added to unrest. There were civil wars in Colombia and Venezuela. Dictators have often ruled Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. British, Dutch, and French Guiana remained colonies. In 1838, the British abolished slavery in their colony. The French and the Dutch followed in 1863. British and Dutch plantation owners then recruited workers from India and China. The Dutch also brought workers from their colony in Indonesia. The immigrants worked on sugar, rice, coffee, or cacao plantations. After a required length of time, they were free. Challenges and change. Independence did not bring an end to trouble. Political and social problems continued to plague Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela through most of the 20th century. Venezuela, for example, did not have a peaceful transfer of power until 1969. The British granted self-government to their colony of Guyana in 1891. In 1953, colonists were given the right to vote and to elect a legislature. Guyana gained independence in 1966. Colonists in Dutch Guiana received the right to vote in 1948. They gained self-government in 1953. The colony became the independent country of Suriname in 1975. The people of French Guiana became French citizens and gained the right to vote in 1848. Since 1945, the colony has been an overseas department, or district, of France. The lack of strong, stable governments has led to major unrest. Violence between feuding political groups took as many as 200,000 lives in Colombia between 1946 and 1964. Ecuador has not been able to control its remote region in the Amazon basin. Colombian rebels have built camps in Ecuador and Venezuela. This has led to tension between Colombia and its neighbors. A border dispute between Guyana and Venezuela was finally settled in 2007. Another border dispute broke out after Suriname's independence. Guyana's African and South Asian populations have competed for power. This has caused years of unrest. Suriname has also faced internal unrest. The military took power from civilian leaders in 1980 and again in 1990. Rebel groups of Maroons tried to overthrow the government. Maroons are descendants of escaped slaves. In response, the army killed thousands of Maroon civilians. Thousands fled to French Guiana.